I wanted to do a little shorter and less lore and research heavy video for a change, and decided to pick a topic I have been wanting to tackle at some point anyway. Today we're doing some character designing on the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, because these are actually characters I have been designing before I even knew what character designing is. I guess the concept of these characters has always just kinda intrigued me, and therefore I have drawn them maybe once in every few years, so it was about time for me to do my latest designing on them. The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse are 4 characters in the Bible, in the book of Revelations to be exact, which is the last book of the Bible where a biblical end of the world is described. According to the text, the Lamb of God opens a book with 7 seals, each seal broken, causing a different apocalyptic event to happen. With the first 4 seals, each of the infamous horsemen are summoned, being given a task and equipment to do it by 4 angels who are referred to as 4 living creatures. The horsemen are personifications of the plague, war, world hunger, and death, who are to rid the world with each force before the last judgment. The horsemen are quite known in pop culture nowadays and are used as a theme in many stories and media overall. I myself found out about the 4 horsemen through the Good Omens book, where the horsemen are depicted as 4 ominous motorcyclists. I was like 14 in my edgy phase, and I got really intrigued by this whole character concepts of different miseries personified, which led to me trying my own versions of the characters for several times, which has now led to this moment. Even little me was definitely onto something, because I do still think that the Horsemen of the Apocalypse have a really interesting character idea behind them, and the character designer in me had so much to get inspired by. I was also pretty pumped to include some cool, maybe even a bit creepy horse designs to go alongside with the horsemen themselves, because if you didn't notice about me, I would absolutely identify myself as a horse girl. There was a time when I would draw horses solely, so even though nowadays I draw more people, less horses, I'm still quite confident in saying that I know what I'm doing. So, I used my old designs for the base of these new versions, because there actually were many ideas I still found good, but as an older and wiser person now, I also pushed the original concepts further and came up with some whole new things. I had really fun with these character designs, so I hope you will too, while watching me execute my old and new ideas. I watched as the Lamb opened the first of the 7 seals. Then I heard one of the 4 living creatures say in a voice like thunder, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. The first horseman is most commonly understood to be the personification of pestilence, so disease and contamination in an epidemic scale. I could see this including both infectious illnesses like different plagues, pandemic diseases, and even just everyday influenzas, but also things like pollution and nuclear radiation, which can cause sickness, cancers, and poisoning. In the original Bible passage describing the first White Horseman, he isn't outright named as Pestilence, causing some to also interpret him as standing for Antichrist or moral war, so all the other wars except civil war. At the end of the verse introducing all the 4 riders, it is however stated that one of the riders has the power of killing with plague, which has made most people and media connect the white horse with pestilence, since all the other miseries are easily associated with each of the other 3 riders. It was pretty clear to me that I wanted to portray Pestilence as a plague doctor, a specific physician who treated those suffering from the bubonic plague in the medieval times. Plague doctors have always been very recognizable, especially due to the bird-like mask they wore, so I thought it would be good, no further explanation needed look also for my Pestilence character, so I gave him the iconic mask and made his overall uniform plague doctor styled. The fabrics in the design are ripped, dirty, and moth-eaten to show off Pestilence's filthiness, and the little we can see of his skin is bandage-wrapped and seemingly in a necrotic state. Pestilence's horse is wearing a creepy horse gas mask to refer to what I said earlier about illness being able to show up also because of pollution or poisoning. The horse has this kinda zombie horse vibe going on. Its body is full of blisters, rash, and festering wounds, being wrapped in dirty bandages, and its mane, tail, and hooves are unkempt. Don't call animal protection services, I think that's just the way how the horse is. In the Bible passage about the White Horseman, he is described carrying a bow, so naturally I gave one to Pestilence and aimed it to look like it's made out of bone for the soul creepy factor. In the 1916 novel about the Four Horsemen, Pestilence uses the bow to shoot germ-containing arrows and this way spread the different diseases around. I thought that is a very cool concept, so I tried to include it also to my design by having the arrow about to be shot, be dripping something iffy, and have this weird green glow to it. I ended up giving each of these characters an additional smaller animal companion to complement the teams of each horseman, and for Pestilence that is 5 rats, since rats, or more precisely the fleas they can be carrying, are infamous for spreading the fatal bubonic plague in the medieval times. Plus, rats are kinda just seen as a telltale sign of a filthy and/or disease-ridden surroundings. For the same reason, there's also a big swarm of insects around the horseman to really make your skin itchy. Pestilence's main color is white, but to make the overall design visually more interesting, I mixed in some green, which I think works well as a combo in this particular character design, since white is often associated with hospitals, whereas green is the color of sickness. And then there's also red as an accent color, making especially both the horsemen's and the horses' masks kinda match with each other. When the lamb opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." Then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from earth and to make people kill each other. To him was given a large sword. The second horseman stands for war. Some have seen it being the personification of just civil war, but nowadays it is pretty much agreed on to include all kinds of wars and mass killings like conflicts and battles. I could see war also covering overall violence, wrath, and people killing each other. I made my war character a headless horseman type of figure since I thought it would fit with the whole violence theme, implying that he has somehow had himself decapitated. He is of course dressed in an armor, long, blood-covered cape, and is carrying his head/helmet, which has this quite recognizable feather ornament, but which is instead made out of fire. There's also some blood running out of the eye vents simply because blood, violence, and I put some golden markings on the both helmet and the armor's chest piece to kinda look like wounds. In the Bible passage, horse is described as being a fiery red one, which of course gave me quite strong visuals about a flame-made steed and a warm color palette. The horse is just straight up made out of lava and lava stones, giving it this fun spotted look, which I think works well. To try further the concept of the horse being made out of fire and lava, the horse's eyes, nostrils, and ears are glowing a fiery light, and there's some smoke coming out. The horse's equipment is based on medieval equine gear, and there's some barbed wire wrapped around its fetlocks. The horse has a boar-like tusks coming from its mouth, since boar is an animal often associated with violence and a symbol of the Greek god of war Ares. The tusks also just make the horse look more aggressive and maybe even a bit dragon-like. In a similar manner, also the horse's head defense has these spikes sticking out of it. They are in the line with the horseman's sword motif as well, since in the biblical quote, he is given a large sword to cause havoc with. War has said sword in his hand, but I also put some additional swords behind him, sticking out of the horse's croup. Since the horse is made out of lava and can't feel pain, I guess that's like a convenient place for War to keep his weapons. It also just makes the whole design look like the horseman has survived many battles and/or has the sword as some kind of collected trophies. Originally, I planned for War to have many different kinds of weapons from different time periods on him, but I don't know if that would have made the design a little cluttered and chaotic, so it was just clearer for him to have just swords and sword-like shapes. In the horse's reins, however, I did put some bullet pattern as a homage to that original idea. As an animal companion, War has this phoenix-like fire owl, which doesn't have any deeper reason other than it looks cool, and trained birds have allegedly been used in wars as scouts. Overall, I wanted the design to look fierce, aggressive, threatening, and victorious in a way, since War himself is definitely the only one winning whenever there's a conflict between mortals. When the lamb opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. Then I heard what sounded like a voice among the 4 living creatures saying, 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages, and 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the oil and the wine. The third, Black Horseman, represents famine, so large-scale hunger, malnourishment, and starvation caused by, to name a few, high cost or total lack of food, harvest ruined by weather or disease, or political situation. In the passage describing the Black Horse, it is very clear that the horseman's job is to increase the price of food so much that one person can barely feed themselves with what money they can make in one day, making the life of, for example, families impossible. The cost of food is probably being driven up by making the food available scarce in one way or another. The passage also suggests that this famine affects mostly those who are already struggling. Oil and wine, which are things only rich people could afford anyways, don't become more expensive, but wheat and barley, essentials for the survival of ordinary people, are pretty much out of reach. Famine is definitely most unfair of the 4 miseries, since it's the only one you can beat with enough money. I think every previous time I have drawn these characters, Famine's design has always been the most boring one, just a skinny guy riding a skinny horse. But this time I was actually pretty excited to get to draw her, since while brainstorming I came up with this little bit different and more interesting perspective for the design. My thought process behind Famine's design was that I wanted her to read as this rich, privileged and noble lady / princess who has all her essential needs filled and even a bit more, but is still blinded by unsatisfiable hunger, thirst and want that make her take from those less fortunate and become more and more beast-like as a result. She has a seemingly endless void in the place of her stomach to drive this point further. She is wearing a lot of golden jewelry, an expensive looking dress and this horned headwear that make her features resemble those of a wolf or other wild animal. On her arm she is carrying a bunch of spoiled harvest, though I don't know how visible it is in the final design. I also put some blood around her mouth to give off some unsettling implications of her maybe being ready to do anything to fill her hunger. Appropriately, also Famine's horse looks emaciated and monstrous with an unnaturally wide mouth and sharp teeth. I made the horse's bridle gear kinda complicated because I wanted it to read as if that horse is absolutely feral and will bite everything it sees, so the bridle works also as a muzzle. I was also pretty inspired by Wendigo with my Famine character and her horse. According to certain Native American beliefs, a person can turn into a Wendigo if they take part in cannibalism. Cannibalism can occur during famine when there really isn't anything else to eat than other people. A Wendigo is a monster cursed with the eternal feeling of hunger and taste for human flesh, and is often depicted having antlers, so I gave a pair of those to Famine's horse. The antlers resemble bare trees, working also as a reference towards infertile times. Famine is described carrying a pair of scales, referencing how during hard times the food has to be strictly rationed. I made the scales in the shape of 2 cups, as sort of symbols of consumption, and to point towards the quote in the Book of Revelations, they are filled with oil and wine. Famine's animal companion is a vulture, a bird of prey often associated with barren areas, and is kinda creepy, patiently waiting for something to die so it can gorge on their corpse style of feeding. Overall, I use a lot of sharp and pointy shapes in the design, implying teeth/fangs. The third horseman's color is black, but I made her dark color scheme to bend towards purple, since purple was long known as the color that only the rich could afford. There's also a lot of golden accents for obvious reasons. When the lamb opened the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th living creature say, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. They were given power over a fourth of the earth to kill by a sword, famine and plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth. The 4th and the last horseman is the only one clearly named in the original biblical text. He is Death, and he is being followed by Hades, the underworld and its inhabitants. It is a bit unclear if the last sentence about them having power over a fourth of the earth refers to Death and Hades or to all of the 4 horsemen. I like to believe it to be the latter, since it would fit perfectly, there being 4 riders and 4 miseries mentioned, Death being the one associated with the wild beasts. Death is often seen as the worst of the riders, the one with no mercy or other option or outcome. Something the other miseries are just a lead up to, the ultimate end to all ends. But paradoxically, I see Death also as the only rider who has the possibility to be good and kind. There really isn't anything pleasant about war, famine, or plague, but Death can be painless, quiet, soothing, and even desired and liberating, and I wanted that to show in my design for this character. Since Death is slightly different than the other horsemen, possibly the leader of the group, I aimed also my Death character to stick out. She is in the form of a skeletal little girl, dressed in a white burial dress with a ribcage-styled front piece, since bones are possibly the most common symbols of death, and personified death is more often than not a skeleton. Death's eyes are blindfolded to reference people who are on their way to be executed, but also to show that death is blind, so to say. She doesn't care who you are, poor or rich, at war or at peace, sick or healthy. She has the ability to claim everyone, and eventually she also will. I made her have bare feet since I thought that would underline her being in the form of a carefree child, and also because death is definitely the most natural and primitive thing in the whole world. Death is the only one who isn't given an exact equipment in the original biblical text, but I made her have a sickle since personified death is often depicted carrying one. On her back she has big black angel wings, because it's quite common for death to be described almost as this angelic or otherwise flying being. She also has a flower crown in her head, since flowers are common symbolism in death and in customs around death. Death's horse has a slightly stylized horse skull as its head and a skeleton-shaped, I guess, pattern on its coat, since in many illustrations Death is riding a literal skeleton horse. My Death character's steed is, however, otherwise probably the most healthy, normal, and noble looking of the bunch, because I, again, wanted to show that Death is the most victorious, but also the most natural force. When it comes to the horse's accessories, I was really inspired by horses who draw funeral carriages. They often have a black feather decoration on their bridle, which here also goes with Death's wings, and this black blanket on their back. It is also a happy accident that, if you squint your eyes, the Death horse's eyes kinda resemble blinders, which block the visions of a carriage horse, making it less likely for the horse to get spooked by something. The reins of the horse have this similar fabric as Death's dress, so I guess they are made out of burial shrouds. Overall, I wanted the design to have this bittersweet, somber, and even a weirdly beautiful aesthetic. Flowers, lace, and little bows are often seen as cute childish details, which works for my Death character, but in this context they are therefore also a bit off-putting. As I previously said, at the end of the Bible passage describing the Four Horsemen, War, Famine, and Plague are named and connected to the other three respective riders, which let me assume that the wild beasts mentioned are meant to refer to Death. That's why I gave Death as a black panther as an animal companion. Death's horse is described being pale-colored, which to me connects to something a little eerie and death/sickly related, so I made the whole design's color scheme this very faded bone hue. I realized this only afterwards, but Death is the only one of these characters who doesn't have any blood in her design, which I think drives further my point about natural death being non-violent and almost serene. At the start I talked about wanting to do a video which needed less work, but I don't know how well that turned out, since drawing these characters took actually more time than usual. Probably because these were more detailed than my usual character designs, and I also ended up doing a lot of shading and rendering, almost in a more illustration than a character design style. But I don't know if that really matters, since I'm really happy how this turned out, and it was kind of satisfying to pick up the best parts from my previous horseman drawings and improve on them with these new versions. I think they all are an upgrade, especially since now I actually know how to use digital drawing software and can therefore get the exact vibe, texture, and color I am going for. So, let's let these guys go gallop on their merry way, and you and I will see each other in the next video. Thanks for watching, bye for now.